Generic greetings and welcome to Science Insanity, a podcast dedicated to bringing my love of science fiction in all its wondrous, glorious insanity to you, the viewer. Today along for the ride is my friend Steve, the stand-in for the audience, and generally science illiterate, meaning that we get to spend plenty of time memeing and explaining things. Introduce yourself, Steve. Well, shit. To be honest, I don't really know what happened, man. Ever since I started on this new medication regime that the doctor put me on, I can't find Steve anywhere. His number even disappeared from my phone. It's like the dude just changed everything and dropped off the face of the earth. Won't even say hello when I walk by on the street corner now. He's just gone. It's fantastic. Anyways, long story short, haha, funny joke aside, Steve will not be joining us today because of unfortunate scheduling issues, so I'm going to be recording and taking you through all of this wondrous insanity myself, which also means the video is going to be going a little bit faster because there's going to be less banter and I'm going to be more prepared to just absolutely blast off jokes and references and information as we go. So, what are we covering today? Aliens! The entire Alien series, a lore primer, a dive into everything from how humanity is just the worst species ever. I mean, the Xenomorphs give us a run for our money, but goddamn does Weyland-Yutani really show how terrible we can be. The horrible living conditions and technology that humanity has. We're going to be talking about, of course, Weyland-Yutani, the worst company ever, and carrying on the long tradition of megacorporations being just the worst thing imaginable. Like, worse than villains, man. They're worse than any monster or alien ever. Corporate greed is truly the scariest thing out there. We're also going to be covering the titular alien, those wonderful xenomorphs, how they work, what they are, and why they are so unbelievably grody. Stupid latex-looking gimp-suit-wearing steppy-boy long-legged freaks, and we are going to be covering the Yautja. If you don't know what those are, or you're angry I pronounced them wrong, they are these on-screen, big, sad, very angry-looking boys in fishnet stockings. Now, hear me out. I can't say their name, or more accurately, I'm very afraid to, because that word is a big no-no on YouTube and gets flagged all the time as not acceptable for monetization. So maybe when we're 10 or 15 minutes in and YouTube is no longer paying attention, we can finally say their name. But until then, sorry, I'm not willing to deal with it. And finally, we are going to talk a little bit about engineers, because while they are very important to the actual setting, they, don't really pop up much. They're basically just background set dressing, and considering the cradle of humanity is background set dressing is something we would absolutely as a species do once we started really getting out there, so it's on brand. And what are we going to start with? Well, good old-fashioned anxiety apes themselves. Humanity! We're going to be dealing with humans and their tech and where they are in the universe and how mind-numbingly screwed they are in the face of bioengineered super life forms. Yay. Like most science fiction settings, Aliens is, well, set in the far future, where all manner of wondrous and terrible things happen as a matter of course. Being eaten by aforementioned gimp-suit latex aliens, being stabbed by fishnet-clad aliens, being violated in all of the wrong ways, in all of the wrong places, by aliens of the non-humanoid variety, and who can forget crushing corporate wage slavery dealing in the far exports and incredibly dangerous professions of outer space work, while you basically have absolutely no recourse, because your corporate overlords quite literally can turn the oxygen off whenever they want. It is absolutely lovely. Wouldn't you enjoy living in this future hellhole? And with that briefly explained, let's talk about why Earth is just the worst place to live in this universe, and you would be better off in one of the company colonies way off on the fringes, where at the very least, you have fresh air to breathe. Now, while Aliens and Earth is not, the worst thing ever, trademark, like 40k likes to self-fillet over, it is pretty terrible. Earth is incredibly overpopulated, remarkably polluted, the difference in wage and wealth disparity is absolutely insane, and the vast majority of people that aren't sitting at the very top of their, in some cases quite literally, ivory towers, are basically scraping by on whatever they can. The middle class basically doesn't exist, and you're either part of the exploitative ultra-wealthy or political class, or you're probably dying in some mine somewhere on a planet or moon nobody's ever heard of, and your family is probably getting an oops, sorry from the company that unfortunately spent your life because it's just that cheap and nobody really cares. Generally, human life in Aliens is viewed as entirely disposable because it mostly is, and completely worthless. And while that's not true, it's certainly how many people in the corporate industries and wonderful upper crust treat people today, so, we're staying on brand. This is depressingly accurate and I want off the bus, please. Now, while everything might not be peachy, there are some upsides to this. Humanity in the Aliens universe, for lack of a better term, is basically ascendant. They're spreading out over the stars, they're making stunning advances in technology and sciences everywhere from computing to medical to space travel to weaponry, of course, and they are expanding at a lightning rate across multiple colonies, dozens of worlds, hundreds of small stations and habitats, and generally experiencing a technological wealth and population boom across all the local star systems. And considering that while humanity may be relatively low tech, most of the competitors it has to deal with are either locked to whatever hellhole planet they were stuck on, see the aliens, dead, mostly, the engineers, or generally not in large enough numbers due to their society or way off in the ass end of nowhere that they don't really bother humanity much. See, I still don't think we're far enough in to actually say their name, so big ol' Hingehead, everybody knows them. Arnold Schwarzenegger killed one of them in the middle of a forest. Let's go. The downsides of this incredible expansion and general hegemony in their region of space is unbelievable and ever-present crippling corruption, violence, corporate wars, and in some cases incursions by marauding xenofilth with relatively weak governments. You see, in Aliens, the already corporatized politics of the modern day get even worse. We are talking about truly ridiculous levels of corporate control where in many cases the governments of Earth basically just went, well, okay, I guess you do you. And the vast majority of all travel, research, industry development, and even just outright ownership of all off-Earth properties and resources is straight up corporate owned. So you know how in the real world we have the World Health Organization or the World Bank and their pseudo-political governmental organizations that exist to kind of help other countries out, manage global information, and coordinate efforts and effects when things like an unnamed plague pop up as they try to deal with it and give good tips, best practices and stuff to all the countries that are a part of it? Well, those things still exist in Aliens, and they're very powerful. But the only reason they're so powerful is because unfortunately, unlike in the real world where they're kind of impotent but controlled generally, marginally by the governments of the world, in Aliens, Walmart controls the WHO. So we're kind of in a terrible situation where if another pandemic pops up, Walmart goes, the way that you cure it is by buying more of our products, and nobody can really debunk that because it's just kind of the way it is. However, before we delve more into things like the corporations, the technology, the colonial marines, and the remnants of, humans' big stick governance style, let's go back in time a little bit and talk about where humans came from, because oh boy is this rather entertaining. You see, back way before the Earth actually had life and it had just cooled off and the oceans were generally settling on the planet's surface, a whole bunch of aliens came by and go, damn, you live like this? And dumped a ton of black engineer splooge onto Earth before life was really up and kicking, seeding the planet with the genetic material it would need to start life's wheels a-turnin'. This aforementioned black goo was actually a sort of, for lack of a better term, supercharged evolutionary slop that was basically created by the engineers and custom genetically tailored to evolve very rapidly and very aggressively. It was designed to take whatever local characteristics it had and adapt very quickly to fill that niche and be, for lack of a better term, an apex predator. and over extreme enough amounts of time, this can grow into a very large biosphere, which generally explains why almost all life on this planet, at least according to aliens, is extraordinarily ornery and generally takes very unkindly to the idea of other things living in their general premises. If it's alive and moving, it's about to be not those things, according to aliens. And this is because, well, that genetic splooge basically exists to create weapons. We will get into that further when we talk about the engineers, but suffice to say, left alone, untouched and undisturbed on Earth for so long, it began to evolve and eventually, after a few billion years, created humans. In this universe, humans are not special, we're not divinely ordained, there is nothing particularly unique about us, and we're not even special in the way that science in real life says that goes, damn, we're a pretty special galactic accident. Instead, we are literally the product of some dude dumping his trash onto the planet, then flying off and forgetting about it for a few billion years. Yay. Of course, if I'm going to be entirely honest, I'm pretty sure the upright anxiety apes that eventually grew out of this black splooge are the farthest thing away you could possibly have to a genetically perfect weapon, because most of us still can't do our taxes by 30. How are we meant to compete with something like a xenomorph if you throw us into the same ring? That's just asking for us to die horribly. Thanks, engineers, you are terrible at your job. The very name of your species is a lie. There are also a few parts about this that really get my gears going. You see, there is one thing that I absolutely despise more than anything else in science fiction, and for the most part this would have been more entertaining with Steve. Unfortunately, I can't seem to find him because, well, he actually knows the setting and I don't, so it would be an interesting reversal of roles. But after doing quite a bit of research, I have come to the conclusion that I hate the aliens lore. It is horrifically annoying. Why? Because it's literally like watching Ancient Aliens. Everyone knows that show, everyone knows the memes, it's fantastic. It's basically dozens of seasons of a crazy person going, aliens did it! A space wizard did it! They're putting chemicals in the water to turn the frogs into xenomorphs! And that's basically what the entire series was, and that's entirely what Aliens lore is. If you ever see something that you would expect to see on Ancient Aliens, the exact same response is here. Why are there pyramids? Aliens done did it. Why are humans the way we are? Aliens done did it. Why do we have our culture and religion and our belief in certain things? Aliens did it. Why do we have certain stars, constellations, this, that, and the other? Aliens! It basically devolves into a space wizard did it. And that's the entirety of the early lore. And I'll be honest, some people are super into that. I am not. When someone goes, a space wizard did it, it really sits the wrong way. Star Wars can get away with it because they are actual literal space wizards, but this is just, come on, guys. Come on, really? Why is it that humanity always has to be aliens did it as like the general response to why we ever did anything? Why are humans not allowed to be badass, intelligent, and creative creatures, huh? Why are we not allowed to own that? Why can't we be that? Anyways, moving on. Now, what I meant by this, for the most part, and I think we're far enough in that I can get past the YouTube censors, is when the Predators, as everyone knows them, actually came to Earth, they came a really long time ago. Back during, like, the pre-Bronze Age level societies, where people were basically building really big stone and mud pyramids. And they basically integrated themselves into many of the societies because of their own culture, not really as equals, because why would they be, but as gods and superiors. We even see in some of the movies that they use the religious faith of early humanity to get sacrifices, turning hundreds or thousands of people into, xenomorph makers, I guess would be the correct term. I don't want to use anything else besides that, because while they may have been getting that bread, they were certainly also getting bread, and I am not okay with that. That's very not okay, please. Xenomorphs are creepy enough as it is. Don't make me describe what they do to people to reproduce. And they were basically doing this because the Predators wanted a challenge. They wanted to be able to hunt the most dangerous of prey in the most dangerous of areas, and they figured that using the local human population to basically farm xenomorphs for them to test their mettle on and blood themselves on was a wonderful way to do it, especially since many human communities were super isolated in the ass end of nowhere. They they could be easily quarantined and turned into hunting pens for the predators. In fact, all of Antarctica at one point used to be that before the predators decided that, well, we lost one hunt, so because we're terrible sports, we are going to detonate the sun on that continent and basically remove all life from it, which is a little oof. By the way, fun fact, did you know Antarctica actually used to be like tropic rainforest kind of thing a really, really long time ago? At least partially based in reality with real science, because we found fossils and evidence of a much richer biosphere in Antarctica than what the normal current day frozen over hellscape would suggest. And as for why the predators wanted all of these early civilizations and used pyramids, well, basically it was just convenient terrain. Every wargamer knows that like 80% of the enjoyment of the game is good terrain, and the same thing applies to the predators. They wanted a wonderful place to fight the aliens, and these giant pyramids surrounded by small dwellings and then thick rainforest made for absolutely excellent hunting grounds with a variety of territory, wonderful high ground they could use to pick off their targets, and an excellent variety of natural hazards to either trap the xenomorphs or get themselves killed in. So they chose those regions pretty specifically. However, they fought literally all over the place, and that's part of the reason why, quote-unquote, the ancient aliens theory of everyone building pyramids everywhere actually happened in the aliens universe, because the predators, they liked their big pyramids, their sacrificial altars, and it was a convenient place to drop the predators off of on top so that they could survey the land and then get ready to go hunting. I hate it. I hate this lore so much. I absolutely despise it. Aliens are not responsible for the pyramids. A pyramid is just a really convenient way of stacking up rocks so that they don't fall down. It's not that hard to understand. All the different cultures on the Earth figured it out because stacking rocks in a pyramid is the easiest way to do it. And that brings us back to the modern age. You see, humans' technology is what I can comically describe as science guesstimation, because it's not relatively advanced, but it's also not particularly primitive. It's kind of in that weird in-between where some of it is super advanced, even for science fiction, and some of it is absolutely not. Almost like aliens decided to take the general science fiction tropes of shields and engines and crazy computers and all of these like lasers and flashy lights and stuff and just throw it all out the window and say, no, we're just going to hyper-develop what we already have in the real world, and that leads to a really, really cool technological development and a very cool on-screen aesthetic. And the first thing we're going to talk about is faster-than-light travel, because that is my favorite thing to cover in science fiction, and I am a turbo nerd. Unfortunately, from what I could see, Aliens does not have any well-defined faster-than-light technology that is ever really talked about. It's more of an in-the-background kind of thing that you can kind of extrapolate exists based on pure distances traveled and the time it takes them, but also nothing that's ever actually talked about. So, while it's disappointing there's nothing super in-depth or, like, directly stated, we can do some math to figure stuff out. You see, in Aliens, the Nostromo takes about 3 weeks to get to its destination from approximately Earth. That's about 30-ish light years. Even traveling at 10 times the speed of light, it would take 3 years to get there. So with the 3-week travel time, it's relatively safe to assume that human FTL, at least in the commercially available ones that Weyland-Yutani's more civilian shipping fleet has, can move several hundred times the speed of light. But even still, that is slow as hell when you're talking about interstellar distances. Which leads to cryptopods. Cryptopods? Oh god, that's terrible. Oh, that's a horrible thought. I hope crypto dies off long before this. I meant to say cryopods. Far less scary and far more useful to the general populace. Now, you see, cryopods aren't actually a necessity, which is something I really, really like about Aliens. They are a resource-saving measure by the companies that build them. It would absolutely be possible to have enough air and resources for a 3-week trip and back, with maybe a month or two in between for working and research. We can see general equivalents in modern Navy ships today, where they have months or even years worth of supplies to carry around the world with them. However, why would you include that when you could just not and save that money? You see, space, ironically enough, is very limited in space, and all of the extra weight that oxygen, food, water, and that kind of stuff would take up would cost an incredible amount or would eat into any budget for building these ships or make the space frame unnecessarily huge for no reason. Instead, by putting the crew into cryo, they use drastically less air and have little to no need of food or water. It's also not exactly cryo, as much of it is a form of super hibernation, where the body basically gets put on 1,000 times slow-mo, with the heart beating like once every couple weeks kind of thing. There are also mostly no negative side effects from this, as we can see Ripley wake up after decades in one. They are super common in basically every form of ship, and what keeps them functioning, or I guess what keeps them safe and monitored, is that most ships either have one crew member that stays up for that time, monitoring everything, making sure it's all working, doing what needs to be done on the long interstellar voyage, and then waking up whatever crew is remaining on the ship. Usually this only happens on older ships or on stuff that has a very small crew to begin with. However, on much larger ships like the Nostromo, they may have automated systems, or hell, even some of these servitor-looking ass AI pseudo things, virtual intelligences, that are androids that will do the exact same thing and wake the crew up when they get to their destination. They are very creepy and I hate them. They fall into that amazing uncanny valley where you absolutely want to put a fist through their face, but also don't want to get within 100 feet of them. They're great. This is such good robot. I love them. This is exactly how robots would be in real life. I have no fear of them ever overtaking us because nobody would want to be within the same, grid square of these things. Now, while this is mostly fine and they are extremely safe, in fact, you could basically scour a billion different accounts and most of them would come back with literally nothing wrong, and the few that did would be minor anecdotes of being kind of woozy or generally unwell after coming out of them, they're pretty much perfectly safe, except for not really, because there's also some semi-canon / non-canon example of very, very, very bad reactions to it, like being conscious when going into the long sleep and going absolutely insane because of it, or having adverse reactions and dying from a multitude of issues in the actual pods, ranging from the chemicals reacting badly to your body to any number of other things, like perhaps being frozen to death when the chemicals aren't actually injected into you and you don't enter the hibernation state. Yikes, a little bit terrifying. However, again, this is not super canon. It's kind of on that line of questionably canon, just because there's some anecdotes here and there of people talking about it. But it's more of a, one in the million kind of thing. For most people, it's perfectly safe. Weyland-Yutani promises that it's perfectly safe. Would that logo lie to you? I don't think so. Other technology is also incredibly interesting. Like I mentioned with these robots, for the most part, AI don't really exist in Aliens. The stuff that we see, the hyper-advanced virtual intelligences, never quite cross that threshold into true AI because they operate under the restrictions of their programming. In many cases, even when they adapt, such as we see with androids like David, they're not truly adapting or learning or doing their own thing. They're basically just expanding greatly on their already existing programming. If they're programmed to be curious about a certain substance like David was, or to do certain experiments, then that will go absolutely exponentially insane if he's basically just let off the hook to do whatever. It's not true sentience as much as it is a terrifyingly accurate replication of a human mind obsessed with a very specific task, which is an interesting way to go about actually dealing with the AI, and I am going to put the brakes on it here for a second and say that it's not fully understandable to me. Maybe I need to do a little bit more researching, but that's what I generally got the gist of for the robots in the Alien setting. I've seen some disagreement and some different information posted out there, as well as some very, very old comics that seem to contradict that, but if you've got more information on the robots, feel free to share. It's something I'm interested in and I'm probably going to look up more, but if you've got the definitive answer, let me know. As for other stuff, like the computers and the weapons, it's very interesting to see how they advanced. For example, medical pods that are basically a surgeon team all in one. crazy networked computers that can allow people to control different parts of the ship all across it, which is very interesting. Encryption, as well as generic mech suits, science fiction, the works. And the only thing that kind of really gets me is the monitors are still the size of old dinosaur televisions. It's just cool. It's part of the aesthetic and I'm totally there for it, but come on guys, you should have been able to get some LED screens up there. It's not that hard. For the most parts, though, the technology in Aliens developed very heavily along the lines of improvement and problem solving for technology we already had. Is medical technology lacking, or you don't have enough personnel to cram onto a ship to have an actual medbay? Well, you develop these medical pods. They're programmed with basically all human medical knowledge and the ability to deal with literally countless possible scenarios, so even if they're not capable of adapting on the fly, they can do almost anything that a regular doctor would be able to do, aside from, for the most part, diagnosing and coming up with treatments for new issues or illnesses that crop up. They're extremely flexible, and it basically takes what we have now, which is WebMD and Mayo Clinic, and turns them into an actually useful physical thing. And the same goes for a lot of other technology, like weapons or computing systems. With weapons, for example, they didn't invent crazy lasers or ridiculous railguns, they simply made bigger, heavier, regular slug throwers, and then created a number of advanced add-ons to make them more usable. They have a number of hydraulic arms basically holding some of the much bigger guns, stabilizing them for people to use, so what was once a crew-served weapon is now heavy weapons firepower in the hands of one person. They have a bunch of computers and aiming systems basically integrated in with their helmets and their weapons that allow them to aim far more accurately at longer distances and keep better control of their weapons. Basically, the gun compensates for its own recoil, that kind of crazy stuff. It's basically all of the technology in Aliens is designed to take what they had at the time of creation or a little bit before that, and then inventing or creating all of these science fiction solutions to develop them further, rather than going off into the weeds with new random lines of inquiry and stuff. And I think that's really, really unique and really cool for science fiction, because most of the time sci-fi just invents a new thing to throw at you that solves the problem rather than solving the problem. You know what I mean? Now, that's not to say there isn't some crazy alien tech. There is, but for the most part, it doesn't really exist randomly out in the world, because Weyland-Yutani is just the best company ever, and they decided that the little access that humanity has to alien technology and knowledge that aliens exist should be very closely guarded and kept absolutely secret at all cost, with a pure Weyland-Yutani monopoly on the market, not even producing many of these crazy alien weapons, and instead buying out competitors over the years that managed to get their hands on alien tech and just kinda hoarding it while incrementally incorporating it into their normal weapons sales. And speaking of, let's talk about Weyland-Yutani, because they are extremely important to the alien setting. Originally formed from two separate companies merging in 2030, Weyland Industries and another company headed by the Yutani family, they eventually joined to create Weyland-Yutani, specifically in order to buy out another company, Borgia, who had begun producing weapons based off of captured tech from the Predators. The hinge-headed, freaky aliens that have extremely unfortunate names that I don't think I want to repeat too often, because even if we're in the safe zone, it is one of YouTube's big no-no words, like I've said. Megacorporations are, like I mentioned before, more powerful than actual nations on Earth, greedier than the devil, and basically embody the worst aspects of humanity, along with an absolute utter disregard for human life, and Weyland-Yutani is the perfect example of this. They are the market leader in exemplifying the worthlessness of human life. Weyland-Yutani, which henceforth shall be known only as the company, hang on, no, I gotta explain this. So, Weyland-Yutani has such a ridiculous monopoly of space travel, the technology and industry to facilitate space travel and control over the governments, that it's basically an absolute monopoly over science fiction itself. The very idea of that is ludicrous, but it's so omnipresent and so many people are so aware of its blatant corruption that they have stopped calling it by its name and simply refer to it as the company. Because what other companies would there be? who else could possibly compete? That's how big they are. Like I was saying though, the company consistently orders its employees to engage in life-threatening work too, but not limited to, capturing xenomorphs, doing horribly dangerous things like mining at the very periphery of human space with no hope of rescue if things go wrong, performing all manner of absolutely mind-numbing tasks like sitting in front of a massive industrial rock crusher, feeding stones in by hand. Why? Because who cares? You're cheaper than buying a robot to do it. And let's not forget sending their employees on actual literal suicide missions to the middle of nowhere Nostromo style to investigate colonies that they created to research biological alien weapons, and then not telling that crew about it before they get there, because why would they need to know? It is so truly wonderful. Thanks, Weyland-Yutani. They do actually kind of have a reason for this, and it's kind of interesting because I don't really know how much I buy into it. Maybe a little bit, because you see, the company is so powerful, it's basically become a sort of de facto central human government with how much influence it has, and it has almost developed at the very highest levels a sort of deific guiding hand view of humanity almost. They believe in the supremacy of humanity and want to safeguard against all Xenos threats by basically ensuring human supremacy and hegemony forever through the use of advanced technology, bioweapons, and clandestine operations. That's why they actually want the Xenomorph and why a lot of these movies actually happen, because Weyland-Yutani wants to turn the Xenomorphs into a biological and controlled weapon to help them deal with any other threats they may face, like the Predators or the Engineers. That was a little bit retconned in the recent movies like Prometheus, where, the actual leader, the guy in charge, has very different reasons, but canonically in the lore, yeah, that's a big part of it. Sometimes Weyland-Yutani is kind of looking out for the best interests of humanity in their weird Illuminati kind of way. The company is often the only real significant organization in humanity that has access or knowledge of aliens existing, and they also hoard that information extremely zealously and guard it even more so. They knew about other aliens and threats that they just straight up don't tell the rest of humanity because either money or influence. The initial encounter with the famous Nostromo, like we've talked about, and her crew going to that planet and getting absolutely bodied by aliens was because Weyland-Yutani deciphered a warning message from the moon, basically talking about the Xenomorphs. This was an old company town, by the by, that was set up to research the Xenomorphs and alien biology, and Weyland chose not to inform the crew of the ship they were sending about what was going on and what they might be facing. Why? Who knows? The company is notoriously incompetent, alongside malicious and very, very stupid. Do they need a reason outside of being the 1%? I don't think they've really ever needed justification to make terrible, terrible decisions. Also, like I mentioned briefly, they were able to get away from this because they basically controlled all of space. They had a monopoly on space. It's like, you know what, here's a good corporate example, okay? So you know how Lockheed Martin and Raytheon joined into like Lockheed Raytheon or whatever? Well, Weyland-Yutani is like Lockheed, Raytheon, Walmart, NASA, Caterpillar, LabCorp, all in one. Those are all real companies, by the way, and they all deal with all the shit that Weyland-Yutani does individually on Earth right now. For anyone who doesn't understand what fully that means, they're basically the Mechanicus from 40K. For anyone who still doesn't know what that means, they research, produce, ship, sell, control, manufacture, and dominate basically every market share of everything humanity has to do with space. From building the actual physical ships, to transporting things around, to developing new technologies, and even running, like I mentioned before, some of those really big international organizations that deal with like health and technology and military development and stuff. They're so powerful and so unchecked that they even have the authority to create, settle, and manage entire colonies or solar systems from the governments of Earth. So, if the idea of living in a company town and being paid in script is not appealing, imagine living on a company world where your corporate overlords could literally turn off the oxygen if they wanted to, and have done so in canon to quell workers' riots. The influence of Weyland-Yutani is so overblown that most people just can't deal with it. Even laws don't apply to them. They just bribe the police to go away. Weyland-Yutani, the greatest scumbags ever, proudly carrying on the science fiction tradition of corporations just being the worst thing ever. Eat the rich. Although in the case of the alien setting, considering the gribbly monsters that are running around out there in the dark, that might be a little bit more literal than most people generally mean it. And speaking of horrible gribbly monsters from the outer nethers of space, let's talk about the xenomorphs, shall we? Everybody's favorite latex-skinned, gimp suit-looking, extended arms, funny owl-looking, walking monsters from hell. The absolute greatest alien design I think I have ever seen. These things are fantastic. So let's talk about their history, biology, and why they're terrifying, and probably wouldn't exist. And let's start with what they actually are. An out-of-control bioweapon from a destroyed civilization. So the xenomorphs, and I know that there's older lore that contradicts this with comics and stuff that talk about a xenomorph queen, and they're basically eldritch monstrosities. We'll touch on that in a little bit, but I'm going off of the new canon because that's the most recent and there's the most information on that. So the xenomorphs are a biological weapon. Just like how life was seeded on Earth with that black goo, the xenomorphs were created by the same mutagenic sludge. They were basically designed to be the ultimate weapon by the engineers, evolving to be not only extraordinarily fast, deadly, absolutely compassionless, but also immune to some of the most ridiculous conditions ever. Because of their incredibly toughened outer skin and the fact that we don't really know what's going on inside them, but they're magic. They're basically immune to all on-planet conditions, whether it be extreme cold or incredible heat, whether it be blasting sandstorms or biting cold ice. There is nothing that is going to stop them. They can swim incredibly fast. They can climb almost any surface that their claws can gain purchase into. They're capable of ambushing and blending in with local surroundings. And they are extremely, extremely aggressive with the ability to rapidly adapt to basically anything they come up against. And that includes to technology. You see, xenomorphs can actually figure out how to use elevators and basic machinery, as well as how to cut power to systems if they understand or see humans do it. So if a xenomorph is looking at you while you're smashing the close button on an elevator and it's rushing the doors, it's going to figure out how to do that if it sees you. So you better pray it doesn't. Otherwise, Stompy over there is going to be coming up the elevator shaft after you with a raging hard-on for more of that mechanical information. And you better be able to share, otherwise you might end up getting the stick through your back instead. This incredible biology also extends to just, frankly, insane things. So they are also carbon-based life forms. However, somehow, against all biological know-how, they can survive in space indefinitely with no need for air and pretty much no effect by the sucking cold absolute vacuum of space. Now, normally what kills a person in space isn't really the cold, it's the fact that the incredible negative pressure and the radiation that fills space is going to literally boil you alive while crushing your organs and trying to turn them inside out. It is a very, very unhappy way to go, but you can survive being unprotected in space for quite a while, like a few minutes at a time. However, the xenomorphs just don't care about that, at all, and it's absolutely mind-boggling. They also have acid blood? This is also a little bit questionably canonical. You see, sometimes it's described as blood, sometimes it's a defensive layer underneath their skin, so if something ever attacks them, it will basically destroy whatever offending limb dared to puncture their skin. But what we do know about it is that it's so ridiculously corrosive that it's capable of eating through solid titanium plating and just continuing on as if nothing had gone wrong. This is also borderline chemically impossible, by the way, because you would need an unbelievably powerful acid to start peeling apart metals at any appreciable rate. This thing's blood is so acidic, it's probably the most acidic thing the universe could possibly produce. This is impossible, but it's really cool. Another interesting aspect of the xenomorphs is while they rely on their a horrible, horrible reproductive method, they do actually have a number of interesting genetic traits. You see, when they're growing inside of their, host, they are parasites, they will absorb the genetics of their host. If inside of a quadrupedal animal like a dog or a wolf, or I guess like a rhino or something, then they will be inclined to walk on all fours. They'll behave in more of a canid way, and they will be dumber. They will have less of an ability to actually deal with advanced machines or plan strategies and stuff, and will instead be more instinctual and have more developed senses just like their host. But if they're parasitized or whatever from a human, then they'll be the more upright variant that we know and despise. They'll be far more intelligent, and they'll apply far more strategy whenever they're hunting their targets, such as ambushes, deception, frankly outright lies, where they'll walk into a room, walk out of the room, and then just wait outside for the human to come out since they know they're in there but don't know exactly where. They will adapt to strategy, and hell, they'll even learn when to not be afraid of things like noisemakers or flamethrowers or whatever. They learn very quickly. And there are even other cases where, for example, a xenomorph can infest a predator and you get a predalien, which is a really dumb name, but it is what it is. And in this case, they lose some of that acidic blood, and they are less animalistic, but they become much larger, much stronger than a normal xenomorph born from a human, and they become far, far more deadly in their hunts, applying focused and directed strategy that is just absolutely insane and more indicative of the predator species over anything else. So this feeds more into their sort of perfect weapon idea, because when basically dropped onto a planet and forming a new xenomorph hive, which is something that they do just like insects, any target that they begin to infest and kill off, they will absorb their strengths, and they will basically negate their weaknesses by their normal biology. They will learn to adapt and mimic their prey to a much more effective way to frankly exterminate them. If you do not have advanced technology to fight the xenomorphs off, there's a really good chance that even like modern day humans right now, aside from dropping the sun on the xenomorphs repeatedly, wouldn't be able to stop them. Because nothing could. There are no geographic barriers that would slow them down or stop them, from mountains to oceans to rivers to literally anything, and none of your weapons could realistically stop them or slow them down. If you get within stabbing distance, well, you're gonna melt your limbs off, and you have to actually see them and hit them to kill them, and you need some pretty hefty firearms to get through their rather impressive external skin. Of course, the xenomorphs don't start out like this. They have a lifestyle, which is very interesting. Read disgusting. The xenomorph starts out as an egg, and this is basically just a facehugger in a cocoon as it matures, and then waits for prey to either stumble by or be brought to it by another xenomorph. You see, a lot of xenomorphs won't actually kill the people that they hunt outright if they need to reproduce or repopulate. They will instead capture them, drag them back to the hive, and then allow a facehugger to infest them. In the case of Alien Isolation, the video game, the reason that the xenomorphs were straight up murking people is because there was already an infestation of like hundreds of them all over the station, and the queen and the xenomorphs on the actual station. Someone's dropping stuff downstairs, yikes. Guess that's gonna have to stay in the recording because I can't be bothered to edit it out or redo the take. I am so lazy. Like I was saying though, since there was already so many xenomorphs on the station, they just kind of decided with their weird hive mind, we don't really need any more, I think we're good. And then they proceeded to kill everyone. Another part of the xenomorph's intelligence I should mention is that they kind of have a biological stop clock, where once their population becomes too big to a certain size, or the xenomorphs determine that they have enough to control their entire environment, they kind of stop exponentially reproducing, because they will compete with one another eventually for dominance if there's too many of them and start murdering each other. However, that is kind of a strange feature, considering what the hell would they eat if they kill everything off? Maybe that was just built into them genetically so that they wouldn't go absolutely insane and basically force the engineers to glass whatever planet they deployed the xenomorphs onto. Otherwise, that would be quite a pain in the butt to clean up. Next in stage for the xenomorphs is the chest burster. What is the chest burster, you may ask? Disgusting! Disgusting is what it is. It is basically an immature xenomorph that is almost fully formed and ready to burst out of the actual chest of its host. It's not a full adult yet, but it is grown enough that it can now survive on its own and no longer needs the nutrients of the host to continue surviving. It will basically burrow out of the chest of whatever it was born in, and then proceed to go off and live in the xenomorph hive, maturing on whatever other food or decaying corpses were left around by their older siblings for them to feast on, and eventually growing into the next stage of life, the mature or adult xenomorph. We're not going to cover the chest burster much because there's really not much to go over. It's kind of that weird teenage in-between that nobody wants to talk about. The actual full adult xenomorph is perfectly equipped murder machine. We've talked about them at length, so I also don't really feel that we need to go over them aside from a few general things. They stand very tall, anywhere from 7 to 8 feet tall on average, and weighing anywhere from 150 to 200 kilograms. They are real big and real heavy. Shaquille O'Neal has literally nothing on these guys. Literally nothing. However, like we mentioned before with the different types of xenomorphs born from different animals, their size can actually vary greatly depending on the host. If a xenomorph infests a predator, then the xenomorph that comes out of it, the predalien, will be much, much bigger. And there are some instances with wild animals where, almost rhino elephant things on alien worlds, where the xenomorph was so big it was like an armored vehicle, like a Humvee size almost running around. So they can vary in size greatly depending on what host they have access to. Again, because they adapt to kill whatever they've infested. So if they're fighting really, really big prey, they are going to be really, really big xenomorphs. There are 2 more stages of life after this, and you see, part of xenomorph biology is they don't really need to have men or women. They are a sort of asexually reproducing and morphological creature. When a Praetorian is born, which is the next stage of a xenomorph's evolution, it's basically a regular adult xenomorph that, after being juiced up enough on incredible growth hormones and or being the dominant xenomorph in a group, will begin molting, for lack of a better term, to become a much larger, much more aggressive, and much more intelligent version. This normally functions as the direct guards or the elite troops of a xenomorph hive, protecting the queen, protecting the eggs, making sure that any invaders into the hive are thoroughly and quickly dealt with, while the regular adult xenomorphs are basically the drones of the pseudo hive mind. However, if no queen exists, then a Praetorian may undergo a similar process again, basically cocooning themselves within the hive and morphing into a xenomorph queen capable of laying eggs. Depending on what creature they were actually born from, again, predaliens are a little weird and a little different, they can actually infest targets directly without the need of a facehugger, and they can act as a pseudo-queen, creating eggs and infesting targets basically by voring their head and going straight down their guts, and instead protect and reproduce for the hive while an actual queen is being morphed by a different xenomorph. They are very icky and very nasty and based off of a number of insects and almost molluscoid and jellyfish creatures that exist at the very bottom of Earth's oceans. They are very weird. There is also a pseudo-canon type of xenomorph called the Empress, or the Xenomorph Empress. Now, this is, again, pseudo-canon because the Xenomorphs have a lot of Lovecraftian influence. You see, in the older lore, the Xenomorphs weren't exactly this kind of animalistic weapon. They were an almost eldritch being. The Empress was capable of mentally and telepathically dicking with the minds of her targets and inspiring visions of absolute terror and madness, or breaking the minds of whoever she actually decided to, live rent-free in the back of their heads, and creating almost cults and deific worship of the xenomorphs that people would willingly give themselves over. This is, again, pseudo-canon and not really a thing. I don't know if they'll bring it back in the movies because a lot of this is getting retconned, but this is a really, really unsettling and disturbing thing because in the older comics and the older lore, humanity, and Weyland-Yutani specifically, basically go on like a small crusade trying to find the homeworld of the xenomorphs, burning out hives on all the planets they find them on, and desperately trying to kill the xenomorphs after a hive grew on Earth and threatened to wipe out all of humanity. The Xenomorph War is really cool and is probably going to be covered in a future video, but suffice to say, again, pseudo-canon, still canon, but questionable whether or not it's going to be or has been retconned by aliens so far. And real quick, before we talk about the Predators, which is going to be a much shorter segment, let's go over some fun facts because I just want to. So the xenomorph has two mouths, as I'm sure everybody knows. That outside mouth is actually closer to that of what real-life eels have, where they have main grasping jaws, and then a set of inner teeth inside of that. There's a lot of fish, actually, that have this, that will then proceed to bite parts of the actual prey apart and eat it, while the main jaws are holding it still in its mouth. It is the nastiest way I think I've ever seen of something killing and eating, because only the little inner mouth is actually what does the eating. It is pretty freaky. Those giant ridges they have on their back are kind of questionable what they do, but for the most part, from what I've seen, they're used to help with balance, or that the xenomorphs will stick eggs between them when they're transporting them so that they can still use all of their limbs to move around and be generally creepy monstrosities. Those tails, they're used both for balancing and for slicing you open from long distance because they can be up to 2 or 3 meters long, again, depending on what animal they've spawned from, which is insane. Like, that's a stupidly long tail. Their skin and their inner organs actually have a very cool little defensive layer in there that's biological. You see, this is something that most stomachs have, but humans especially have a very pronounced one. Human stomach acid is very, very powerful, and if you puncture a human stomach, and all of that stuff spills out, you will literally digest yourself from the inside out. That's how powerful that stuff is. That's why a stomach wound is almost always fatal. The worst way to die as well. But the way that you stop from digesting yourself is that while you have a very acidic inner, acid bath in you, your stomach has an incredibly basic lining that cancels it out, so the acid can never eat through your stomach lining. It's the same thing with the xenomorphs. They have all of this insane acid under their skin, but they have layers of extremely basic chemicals that will neutralize that acid and stop it from hurting the xenomorph. This only stops coming into play when the skin is punctured, and then the acid can leak out and interact with everything that's not protected, which is really cool and actually biologically how that works. And with all of that out of the way, let's talk about the Predators. These ugly, gribbly, hinge-headed looking freaks are, quite frankly, far more palatable than the xenomorphs are, because while they are still insane, they are a little more understandable, a little more comprehensible, and quite a lot cooler, at least in my opinion. And the reason for this very different opinion is because the Predators are Giga Chads. Not only are they incredibly technologically advanced, using things like powered armor, stealth suits, visual camouflage, all kinds of crazy power weapons, along with plasma guns and the personal sun generator on demand if things are going to go wrong, but they also have an insane tribal aesthetic to all of the weapons that they use. I would also like to point out, despite the fact that many of them use less advanced technologies like weapons or spears, because culturally they consider them to be more honorable, they're made of some of the craziest stuff ever. Canonically, when they tested the melee weapons of Predators that had been slain or that they had managed to capture or whatever, they had no idea what it was. It didn't test for any known metal in the periodic table and was crazy durable, crazy strong, and insanely sharp, holding its edge against tests that would be, frankly, weapon-shattering for almost anything else, even the best humanity had. Predator weapons, even in many cases, are completely immune to the xenomorph acid. Despite the fact that that stuff will eat through the hull plating of even the strongest human battleships, the fact that a measly sword that the Predators use or their body armor is completely immune to their acid is insane. Frankly, I also think that there has been some genetic tampering done for the Predator species because biologically they have a few interesting quirks. Now, obviously, we can see they are very, very tall, being about 7 to 9 feet tall, some even taller, at least if what anecdotes will say, and they can live for obscene amounts of time. Now, their society is very brutal. Obviously, we can tell with the whole hunter aesthetic, and culturally, they force their young bloods to actually go out and murder xenomorphs or very powerful foes in order to actually become, I guess, adults as a sort of coming-of-age ritual. But despite the fact that many of them die very young, they can live for hundreds or thousands of years. There is canonically at least one Predator Elder that is over 1,000 years old. He could have been around during the times when humanity was back during the old Pyramid Age banging rocks together and bringing xenomorphs to the planet, and he's still around today. It is frankly incredible. They are also incredibly resistant to all forms of disease and any kind of parasites. The xenomorph parasite is obviously too much for the body to deal with because obviously xenomorphs are ridiculous, but almost anything else wouldn't be able to survive. Ringworm, tapeworms, any kind of bacterial or larval infection? Nope, gone. Their body will destroy that stuff without even a second thought, and they regenerate at an incredible degree. Most Predators are capable of taking high caliber bullets straight to the face, just raw chest tanking that damage, not caring, and even being able to regenerate from that damage within a couple days, assuming they have access to adequate food, which, at least to me, reeks of genetic tampering. Those are some things that nobody would evolve normally. You specifically had to engineer your population to be like that, otherwise it would make absolutely no sense. Evolution keys for good enough, not excellent, and the fact that they are excellent at literally everything, including leg day, considering they can jump nearly 20 or 30 feet in the air, which is insane, yeah, I would say there's a little bit of tampering going on there. But aside from literally being gigachads in physical form, they are also like the only other species, like even the engineers just do not give a rat's ass about humanity, but the Predators are the only species that actually respects humanity. Now don't get me wrong, there's an enormous amount of bigotry within the alien societies, okay? They generally view humanity as prey first and foremost. However, unlike a lot of other species that the Predators have run into, including several that they have outright enslaved to build their starships and technology, there is a grudging respect for humanity, and they even treat some of them like the boogeyman, like demons and nightmares that they scare their children with. There is canonically an example of a Predator child being told that the big bad humans will kill you if you don't eat your vegetables. That is a real thing, and I love it. And the reason for is because while humans are not imposing, we're not big and spooky and terrifying like all the other aliens are out there, what they respect is the creativity and the intelligence of humanity. They generally see humans as incredibly short-lived, but very clever, incredibly wily, and with an ability to think on their feet that little, if any, other prey actually demonstrates. The Predators respect a human's ability to outthink, outwit, and out-trap an alien as long as they have the general home field advantage, which is incredible. Many Predators, even while they have an incredibly xenophobic outlook and obviously look down on humans and see them as lesser, do, with grudging respect, admire what they've managed to accomplish, such as in Aliens vs. Predator, where one of the Predators basically gives an honor mark to a human that contributed in killing an alien queen, which is an incredibly significant achievement even for a member of the Predator species. So there is a level of respect, and there is a level of maybe not understanding, but kind of distant acceptance of humanity from the Predators, which is really interesting. In fact, canonically, the predators actually respect humans so much that they actually warn their young bloods, don't underestimate them. It's very common, not through all of the predator clans, but through many of the ones that we've seen on screen, at least, because they do have a clan-like society where they will tell their young ones, do not underestimate them. You are going to get yourself killed. You need to treat them seriously. Even if they're feeble or weak, there are members among them that can outsmart you, and they will kill you if they do. And it's one of those wonderful things that just makes me feel all fuzzy inside, because you're like, yes, there it is. That's what humanity's got. We're intelligent. We're clever. That's how we conquered our own planet and managed to survive. None of this other insane stuff. There it is. And it's nice to be validated for that. When it comes to actual culture and stuff of the predators, unfortunately, we're missing a lot about them, because most of the content we have is from a very surface level view or from individual independent predators, like specific characters that we see pop up in comics, external media, or movies that the audience gets acquainted with. Much of Yautja society, which is their actual species, is pretty much entirely hidden. We know virtually nothing about their worlds, we know virtually nothing about their domestic culture, we know basically nothing about them outside of the hunt, which is the only time they've really been encountered. They do, however, have an enormous amount of stuff to go over for the hunt, but we're not going to cover all of it here because it's basically just an incredibly expansive list of all the horrible monsters and griblies that they've killed and slaughtered, and all the different honor ranks that they have for doing different things, along with a little bit on their naming schemes. For now, all you need to know is that for the most part, their entire society revolves around the hunt, and they are incredibly anal about that, with rules that are basically unbreakable, because if you do break them, you are considered not a true predator and will summarily be unalived by all of your kin. It is not something you want to mess with. And assuming that if you fail in the hunt, well, there's also the very strict honor code that you need to hit that oh no button on your emergency gauntlet and commit death by sun so that you can be honorably redeemed, while your ship will then autopilot back home with pretty much all of the data and video from your helmet feed to prove to all of your brothers and sisters that you were a bitch. And that brings us to the last thing I wanted to talk about. I mentioned we would also talk about Earth. I think we did a pretty good job of that earlier as well, but the last thing is the engineers. Now, these guys actually have the least lore because they are the most recent introduction to the series, and they are also kinda mixed up and very cryptic. Now, I'm going to state this very obviously. We're not going to go into too much detail because pretty much all of the articles and the wikis that I could find on the engineers were basically just hearsay. People speculating on what they could be with very little concrete anything, but we're going to go over what we do know for sure. 1, they were arguably the most advanced species that humanity has discovered or that is known to exist in the Aliens universe. They have an absolute master over genetic tinkering, and they are responsible for creating the Xenomorphs, the black mutagenic goo, and for seeding life over dozens, hundreds, thousands of planets that humanity at least knows that they visited or have been able to decipher from their records. They are extraordinarily adept at biomechanical interfacing and basically have their machines and physical biological bodies be pseudo-inseparable. You can even see in some images of the engineers, they're very clearly wearing a suit, but in parts of it, it blends so seamlessly and so flawlessly in with the rest of their body that it almost looks to become part of their body. They are masters of technology and spaceflight, being able to move far faster than any human ship over far greater distances. They have an almost seamless, immediate reaction in terms of information and star chart navigation. Like, they can display these kinds of star charts and have live updating information. They are also immediately and absolutely hostile to literally everything. This is utterly unknown about the engineers, why they do this or how or what they could possibly be thinking, because from what little is known, it seems like they don't communicate or think in the same way as humans do, but they are hostile to all life that is not their own species, regardless of what it is. They will kill the xenomorphs, they will kill the predators, they will kill any random aliens that they come across on a world, and they will certainly kill humans. In fact, the very first time we realistically see them was in Prometheus, and the entire purpose of that Prometheus base was to bring the Juggernaut with all of that wonderful black gloop back to Earth and commit unalive on the entire human species. Luckily, that was stopped by what I assume to be a containment issue with the xenomorph goop, and that stopped the engineers from committing that plan, but that was a far-flung outpost. It is very, very strange why they do this, and there's never really something that's understood or explained in the lore. The best guess that we have is that they are angry or disappointed with all of their creations, because they did create all of them. And the best reason why is because of their own biological differences. They may look very similar to humans, but they seem to have a different way of perceiving the world. Through decoded and translated engineered data, the scientists almost came to believe that the engineers didn't really see or hear in the way that we do, that for them, music and light was more analogous to physical shape and language than actual language or physical shape, that they may have been able to perceive more or were at a higher level of understanding and viewed anything beneath that or approaching that, potentially, as a massive threat to them. That they may be immediately hostile to all alien life that's above plants, basically, because, oh no, it's the dark forest and we can't have anything challenging us. But again, that's realistically all we really know for concrete fact, and everything else is pure speculation based on what we've seen, and even what we have is, again, questionably canon, because things don't really add up timeline-wise for many of the events that happen. And that concludes a general lore primer for Aliens, the spookiest, arguably most unsettling corporate hellscape monstrosity in space that everybody loves. Now, there was supposed to be some announcements today of a number of things that were going to be done. Unfortunately, because of scheduling issues with Steve, those are going to have to be put off until next week. For now, though, with a relatively simple intro, I will say thank you all for everyone that's made it this far. I greatly appreciate your support and the watch time that you provide, and if you would be so kind, go check out some of my other content. You're probably going to find many things that you enjoy. Science Insanity will return to the regular two-man podcast next week, hopefully, and continue on from there. Next week, we are also going to be talking about the Rifleman from Battletech, one of my favorite looking mechs and one of the worst mechs in the setting lore-wise. So it's going to be fun to have a nice half-hour episode on that where we just absolutely trash talk someone's terrible engineering project. You didn't put enough ammo in it. Why is that hard to understand? And with that, the video is over. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've had a wonderful day. Goodbye!